Hello, everybody. Welcome to the session on energy transition in Rio Pipeline. My name is Edmar Almeida. I'm a professor from the Energy Institute from Catholic University of Rio, and I'm going to be the chair of this session. This session will talk about threats and opportunities for pipelines in the context of energy transition. And I think it's a very, very important decision for Rio Pipeline to bring this issue to this seminar this year. Energy transition is something that is affecting all the industries and will for sure affect the pipeline industry. And I would say that we're going to have a very good discussion today about energy transition impacts on the pipelines industries. We have to discuss the threats that I would say more challenges. I prefer the challenge than threats. I think that we have challenges, but I'm very positive that the pipelines industry can face these challenges and bring lots of innovation and new business models for integrating energy transition for the pipelines and opportunities, of course. And I hope that we will see lots of opportunities in this discussion. So in terms of challenges, there are lots of challenges for the pipelines in the context of the energy transition. We have the question of methane leak control, the change in natural gas specification with the introduction of hydrogen or biogas or biofuel. Also the potential demand reduction in gas and oil pipelines, decommissioning. So there is a lot of challenges that the sector will face, but of course, opportunities are more important. And that's what's going to move this sector. Opportunities in terms of CO2 capture and storage and transportation, biofuels, the hydrogen economies and its impact on this industry. So we have here three very distinguished speakers to talk about these issues. We have Michael Templin from Wood, and then Alex Imperial from DNV, and Andre Aquino from Logan. The first presenter will be Michael Templin. Michael worked for Wood in Houston, Texas, and he managed the business development activities for Wood's consulting business unit. He has worked for 4 years in Wood, but he has a very long experience on EPC companies where he worked more than 25 years. So I think that we're going to have a very good opportunity to learn about Michael Templin experience, also what Wood is doing in terms of energy transition and pipeline. So I'll pass the word to Michael Templin. So Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Edmar. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I appreciate the Rio Pipeline Conference and IBP for inviting me in and giving me a chance to present to yourselves today. I'd like to recognize my fellow speakers, Andre and Alex. Good day to you, and it's nice to be with you as well today. Good afternoon and good day to everyone. You'll have to forgive me. It's my fault that we're speaking English in this panel. The last time that I was in Brazil several years ago, I decided I'm going to do my best to speak Portuguese. And I went on a hot day to order lunch, and I ordered 2 Coca-Colas and a chicken sandwich. And I received 1 Coke and 2 chicken platters, which after that lunch, my stomach was full, but I was still thirsty. And so I've struggled with Portuguese, albeit I've traveled to to Brazil and to Angola several times in my career, but forgive me, and it's a pleasure again to be here. So today, let's get started. I'm going to present a few slides just to provide some context to get to the threats and opportunities within the energy transition specific to CO2 and hydrogen pipelines. There's some new and interesting opportunities for all of us. So with that, I'll get into it. Recently, in the last year or so, the International Energy Agency published a report on net zero 2050. So what is the roadmap, or what would be the theoretical change within the global industrial communities and within the energy networks globally that would transition from a large CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions in 2020 to get to a net zero emissions standard or position in 2050. So as most of us here know, today, currently, the three top emitters within the world are either in heavy industries, in the power and power generation industry, or in the transport and transportation industry. And if you look towards 2050, what do we need to do to get to zero emissions? So one of the biggest things is, of course, clean power and clean electricity will play a huge role in changing, and making the energy transition. So renewables, whether that's solar or whether that's wind, will be a major factor. But then there's a couple of other things that have to happen as well. So people have talked about the rise of a clean energy source and a clean fuel, being hydrogen. And if hydrogen is produced and the CO2 eliminated, then that clean fuel will be the fuel that we use in the future, either for battery development, battery storage, for transportation, to power our homes, to power our industries, aviation and industrial fuels. So the rise of the new hydrogen economy, everyone's talked about this now, and there's a lot of buzz around hydrogen. All that being said, is the new economy for a net zero economy will never be achieved, though, unless there's some sort of carbon capture, because carbon will still be, CO2 will still be created and emitted, and there's going to need to be volumes of CO2 that are captured in the future. So what does that mean? So if we're driving towards net zero, then this will drive new infrastructure spending. So we'll have a vast new networks of electricity and power sources that will be driven, within our own countries and within our global communities. And then for hydrogen and CO2, there will be new networks in terms of localized refueling stations, and then there will be more of a global view of hydrogen as an export fuel. So there will be import and export terminals for hydrogen as well. And this will give rise to the transportation of these things. So if you're going to produce hydrogen, or if you're going to capture CO2, it has to be transported. If there's no transportation option, then you don't have a project. So that's where pipelines come to play. So the vision of the future is a strong demand, either in localized communities throughout countries and their networks of pipelines, and then global transportation networks giving rise to import and export of hydrogen and CO2 through pipeline networks. If we speak just basically first on CO2 pipelines, most of us know that historically CO2 pipelines have been around for a while. They've predominantly been used for enhanced oil recovery. Some of this is being used offshore Brazil by Petrobras, where they are re-injecting about 10 million tons per year for some enhanced oil recovery projects offshore Brazil. And currently there's, around 6,000 kilometers of CO2 pipelines installed, which is not a lot, right? In this energy transition though space, what we see is as major industry and power generation facilities that are using typically oil and gas or hydrocarbon-based fuels to generate their products or power, there'll be a major need to do a carbon capture or a systems approach to collect and sequester that CO2. So in the schematic on the right, we show just a very basic outline of CO2 capture plants being part of, say, refineries, petrochemical plants, power generation plants, where that technology is being developed by several different companies across the globe to capture that CO2 and then push it into a sequestration option or a geological structure for injection. The amount of volume of CO2 that's being talked about on a global scale to reduce CO2 emissions would mean that these types of sequestration projects would have to be developed all over the world to capture the amounts that were used. There's also a big push to reuse CO2. So there's been a lot of research and development in reusing CO2 to make clean cement, to make maybe carbon fibers. And of course, it's used in brewing and the beverage industry as well. In terms of hydrogen, hydrogen is really exciting because if we dissect this slide, the top row on the left is typically historically hydrogen is produced from natural gas. And if you take the natural gas, you put it through steam methane reforming, and you produce hydrogen, there's a large volume of CO2 that comes off of that process. If you capture that CO2 and sequester it, you now have blue hydrogen that you're producing. The balance of hydrogen that is being proposed in terms of clean hydrogen is going to be done, through renewables, because if you have a renewable power source, either through biofuels or renewable electricity, you can run that through an electrolyzer and produce green hydrogen. Both blue and green hydrogen will need to be moved. Therefore, they have to go through pipelines, which is good for us in this conversation today. And the nice thing about hydrogen is there's a few different or several different vectors, as we're calling it here at Wood, in terms of how you can move hydrogen. Hydrogen can be moved in a gaseous or a liquid state. Hydrogen can be moved by changing slightly its chemical makeup. So you can move hydrogen through the production of ammonia. You can move hydrogen through production of maybe an organic hydrogen compound, which makes it very transportable. Now, if you look at the graph on the lower right-hand side, the liquid hydrogen and typical LNG methane transportation option of hydrogen suggest cryogenic pipelines and cryogenic systems need to be in place to move that, including ammonia as well. If you look at something more of an organic compound to move hydrogen, you can maintain it at ambient temperature and through a non-cryogenic pipeline. One of the key factors in moving hydrogen, though, will be the cost of producing it and the cost of transporting it. The last thing I put in this graph for everyone's information today is based on the various modes that the hydrogen or phases that you may transport the hydrogen in, there's a cost associated with it. These numbers will change dramatically as innovations in our industry are driving change. And that's not driving just change in the pipeline aspect of it, but also driving it in the production and the use of it.
Michael, you have 2 minutes, okay?
Thank you, Edmar. That's perfect because I'm on my last slide. So where is this all headed? So in terms of, these new CO2 networks and these new hydrogen networks, what are the opportunities and threats for us, facing us today. And we're very excited about this today because, there's design solutions that are available for new and also repurposing existing pipelines. And that's for a mix of either pure or blended CO2. You can use gas or dense phase CO2 in existing pipelines, depending on its specification, as well as looking at repurposing pipelines for a hydrogen or a blended hydrogen route. All of that needs to be studied. All of it has to be verified. All of it has to be engineered to a certain standard specification and code to make sure that it is viable for service. So this is what we're engaged currently in, is making sure we can reuse pipelines now for this type of service. This is also giving rise to industrial clusters where if you have a high concentration of CO2 emissions, you have a high concentration of heavy industrial facilities that already use hydrogen. This is where the activity is starting to take place. And several of these clusters that are found throughout the world in heavy industrial parts of our countries are now pushing towards clean hydrogen and capturing of CO2, which is driving a brand new pipeline market. We also believe because hydrogen is versatile and can be transported through several different modes or mediums or vectors, it gives many opportunities for different types of pipelines to be developed, as well as different types of import and export systems, which will have to go along with it. It's not just the pipeline itself, but it's also the storage terminals. It's also the compression and equipment used to push the product as well. Threats, I think threats are always there. We know energy transition will move slowly. I don't know if it'll move as fast as the IEA has predicted or would like it to. There's policies that need to be put in place to help this. And then all of our customers are all scrambling and competing for the same capital that they were in the classic hydrocarbon market. So the competition for capital will always slow the pace of development down. Thank you. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michael, for this very interesting and clear, and also to keep in time. So now we're gonna move for our next presenter, which is Alex Imperial, who is the Vice President Market in DNV Energy Systems South America. Alex is a mechanical engineer with postgraduate studies in safety engineering and environmental sciences. And he also has executive education in IMD, Shinteo, and INSEAD. And he has been in DNV for the last 25 years. So lots of experience to share with us. So I would like to pass the word to Alex to start his presentation.
Okay,
Alex,
can you hear me well?
Yeah, but I need you to put your presentation in the full screen mode, please.
Okay, sorry for that. Let's see if is it working now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So apologies for the little bug at the beginning. So thank you, Edmar, for the nice introduction. Good day, everyone. Nice to be here with my colleagues in the panel, Michael, Andre, as well. I would like to thank IBP and the Rio Pipeline Conference organization for the invite. It's a really great pleasure to be here today and share some insights on the energy transition, its impacts in the pipeline industry, opportunities and challenges, and also share a little bit of what DNV is doing together with the industry to help overcome those challenges, as Professor Edmar highlighted in the beginning. Michael, I have to confess that you made my life much easier because you contextualized the subject so well. So thank you for that. And inevitably, I think a few messages will be repeated, but I think this is good because it shows some convergence of the industry, because there are facts that we can't deny when it comes to the energy transition. So hopefully I'll share some fresh perspectives with all of you as well. So, okay. So let's start by looking at the global primary energy supply that we forecast by 2050 in our energy transition outlook that was recently launched. So as you can see, we forecast a shift in the representation of fossil and non-fossil fuels. So today, fossil fuels represent 80% of the mix of the supply, and non-fossil 20%. So by 2050, we see a ratio of 50-50, more or less. When it comes to natural gas, it will be the largest single source by 2050, representing almost 1/4 of the total supply. Biomethane, which is included in natural gas in the chart there, will have its production increased by 100 times, which is significant. And biomass, which also includes biogas and biofuels, is forecasted to increase another 35% by mid-century. So as one can imagine, larger volumes of natural gas and biomass will require pipelines to transport them. So, and I'll come back to this point later on the presentation. But pipelines won't be needed only to transport natural gas, biogases, and biofuels, as it happens predominantly nowadays. They will be needed also for low carbon gases, such as hydrogen, and for transporting CO2 associated with carbon capture and storage projects, as Michael shared with us so well before. So then, considering that, let's take a brief look into how hydrogen, CCS, and CO2 transportation by pipelines will evolve by mid-century. So when it comes to hydrogen, we can see it is growing significantly after 2030, and this, according to our forecast, is mainly after new policies like carbon pricing are widely implemented globally, especially in Asia. And then hydrogen and e-fuels would cover then 5% of the global energy demand by 2050. But according to other reports that we launched just prior to COP26, which is called Pathway to Net Zero, it shows that this uptake, or this share of 5%, is not sufficient to reach the 1.5 degree target. So instead, hydrogen and its derivatives would need to account for 13% of the energy mix by 2050 if we were to be on target to 1.5 degree temperature cap. So by 2050, more than 60% of the world's close to 300 megatons of hydrogen production per year will come from electrolysis, and the rest being producing from fossil fuels like natural gas reforming and coal gasification. And with that comes the carbon sequestration and blue hydrogen that will account for 18% of the hydrogen supply for energy by 2050. When it comes to CO2 capturing and transporting, there are slightly less than 30 operational CCS facilities nowadays, capturing around 40 megatons of CO2 per annum. And we forecast that by 2050, this number will grow to 1.3 gigaton per annum of CO2 being captured through different CCS facilities around the globe. So according to the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute, the CCS project portfolio capacity, meaning all the projects under planning and under different stages of development, increased almost 50% in 9 months. I mean, from end of last year to last September now, which is quite significantly. And that, of course, it's obviously an impact of the energy transition and the pressure coming from different stakeholders and governments, of course. Also, according to the Global CCS Institute, there are currently 32 projects in operation and under development globally, and 28 of them include pipeline as part of their network capturing solution. So, and transportation, right? So it will inevitably drive an increase for pipeline demand. And to quantify this future demand, both DNV, ETO, and the IEA forecast that the CCUS demand by 2050 will grow by pretty much 100 times comparing to the current installed capacity of pipelines, which is around 6,500 kilometers of CO2 pipelines, mostly in the US. That's the capacity installed today. So considering the current role of pipelines in transporting the current energy carriers and its future use to transport hydrogen and CO2 and hydrogen derivatives as well, we envisage the very sound opportunities for the pipeline industry, both in terms of adapting the existing infrastructure, but also in terms of scaling the existing pipeline network. So both new additions and adaptation there. So to quantify this positive impact in terms of expenditures, right, in the pipeline industry, what we envisage in terms of investment evolution into 2050 is what you can see in the chart. So the larger part of the pipeline expenditure will be devoted to natural gas networks, and with the capex fluctuating between 15 billion and 140 billion US dollars per year in the period. So that's the blue part of the chart you can see there. Around 40% of that investment in the period will be dedicated to adding new capacity to the existing networks. Hydrogen will also grow, however, in a more modest scale, but still reaching accumulated investment in the order of 300 billion US dollars in the period. And OPEX, we projected, will remain constant over the period, especially for natural gas, representing more or less half of the size of the capex. And one aspect worth emphasizing is that investments will occur both in terms of new and repurposed pipelines. For instance, through blending of hydrogen and biomethane into natural gas networks, both transmission and distribution networks. But the industry will also face some challenges, right, from technical, operational, safety, and business natures. Most of these challenges are already addressed in details in other technical sessions during the conference, so I won't spend much time here. And a few of them are not new to our industry. Like Michael said, for instance, we have been using pipelines and riser systems for CO2 injection for many, many years, and the industry has been constantly updating and developing new standards to address those technical challenges. But you can see also here that the challenges involve both the EPCI phase and the operational phase in terms of operational safety and metering, for instance. And I think one aspect which is slightly different is the dynamic nature of the energy transition and how regulations, standards, and the market will evolve in the future. That, of course, brings additional uncertainties associated with this challenge. So decision-making process will be a little bit more difficult trying to predict which way to go, if you like. And the two pictures down below, you can see two examples of the first one where you can see the big cloud dispersion there. It's an example of simulation of a full-scale CO2 pipeline failure that was carried out at our Spade Adam full-scale test facility in the UK. And the last one, the colorful one, is the simulation of a subsea CO2 release that we're running. So those two are part of JIPs that we're developing together with the industry to solve those challenges. And I'll talk a little bit about them in the next slide.
Alex,
so
you have 2 minutes for your time, okay?
Fantastic. That's my last slide. Thank you, everyone. So as Edmar said in the beginning, so the main point is to be able to tackle and overcome those challenges so we can benefit from the future opportunities. So I've selected here 4 JIPs that are currently being run by DNV together with several industry partners. Most of them were present during this edition of the Rio Pipeline Conference. And they cover transportation of hydrogen and CO2 via rigid and flexible pipelines. And definitely supporting the industry to address those challenges I mentioned before. So the first one is called the High Ready JIP, which covers the assessment of natural gas networks and their operations and preparing them for the injection of hydrogen. The second one is the spoolable composite pipes GIPs that covers technical economic studies for the use of composite pipes to transport hydrogen, comparing them with the current carbon steel pipelines solutions. The third one is design and operation of hydrogen pipelines GIP that aims at supplementing the requirements of DNV F101 standard for submarine pipeline systems. This was mentioned in a previous session as well. And the last one is the sub-CO2 JIP, which will study the subsea releases from CO2 transported by offshore pipelines at high pressure, dense safe conditions. So as you can see, all of them will generate as an outcome the new standards, new guidelines, new recommended practices that will help reduce the uncertainties and risks associated with those changes and new applications, and supporting the safe deployment of those technologies. So just to finish then, I would like to reinforce the importance of wide industry collaboration, investments in research, development, and innovation, technology qualification and risk assessments to address and resolve common industry issues as soon as possible, as early as possible in project phases. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Very interesting presentation. For sure, collaboration and innovation will be the main drivers for this transition in the pipeline industry. So now we're gonna move for the next presentation. We have Alex Aquino from Logum. He will present us a quite unique case of energy transition in the pipeline industry, where he's going to present us the ethanol transportation pipeline project. I like André Aquino. He works at Logum. He is a mechanical engineer at PUC-Rio, and also he has a post-graduation in business and marketing in PUC-Rio. And he has 20 years of experience working on the energy industry in companies such as Ipiranga, Cosan, Esso, and now Logum. So, André, the floor is yours. André is going to present in Portuguese, but we're going to move to English again when we start the Q&A session after his presentation.
Thank you, Edmar. First, I will excuse to speak in Portuguese, excuse especially Michael, but I guess there is a translation service in this section, isn't it? So, muito bem, boa tarde a todos, boa tarde aos palestrantes, Alex e Michael, boa tarde, professor Edmar, obrigado pelo convite à organização Rio Pipeline. Vou aqui fazer aqui a apresentação. Podemos começar, né? Então, trabalho na empresa Logum Logística e o nosso negócio é transporte de etanol por duto, né? Então, a gente vai falar um pouco sobre o mercado de biocombustível, especialmente de etanol transportado por dutos, né? Aqui é importante assim, já começar dizendo que há um grande potencial para o transporte dutoviário de etanol. Se a gente olhar aqui o mapa do Brasil, que mostra que assim, o consumo principal do país ele está mais próximo da costa, onde estão os grandes centros consumidores, e a produção do biocombustível mais no interior. Sendo que a gente já tem uma área já consolidada, né, uma região já consolidada, é o estado de São Paulo, é onde a empresa, nesse momento, está focando as suas atividades, mas também tem um potencial de crescimento ainda mais para o interior, especialmente o sul de Goiás, e agora, com o advento do etanol de milho, que o país tem produzido e tem crescido no Mato Grosso, também traz oportunidade de novos fluxos de etanol que podem, eventualmente, ser transportados por etanol. Mas, junto com isso, também temos um desafio, porque o transporte de biocombustível, no Brasil especialmente, sempre foi do modal rodoviário, né? Aqui eu trouxe aqui uma matriz de transporte, muitos de vocês devem conhecer, apesar do Brasil ter as dimensões que tem, o modal rodoviário ele é muito presente, ele tem um peso muito grande, né? Mais de 65% é modal rodoviário, então a gente tem que lutar por uma transição de modais, que é do rodoviário para modais de escala, e aí, no nosso caso, o modal dutoviário. Aqui eu trago a diferença de eficiência energética e ambiental do modal de escala versus o modal rodoviário. E dentro do grupo de modal de escala, que eu trouxe aqui o duto, o navio e a ferrovia, a gente tem o duto como ainda, eu diria para vocês aqui que o duto é 10 vezes mais eficiente que a ferrovia e próximo ali do modal marítimo, e 80 vezes mais eficiente, ambientalmente mais eficiente que o rodoviário, né? Então, assim, o impacto, quando a gente faz essa transição de transporte para o modal dutoviário, ele é muito forte nas emissões de CO2, né? E isso é um ponto que o setor de duto deve explorar, precisa explorar, né? Ainda mais agora, recentemente, com todas as discussões que a gente está vendo na COP26, né? Aqui é o nosso negócio, é a empresa o que está operacional, né? Nesse momento. Então, a gente tem 2 terminais no interior, um em Uberaba, o outro aqui em Ribeirão Preto, né, que fazem a coleta do etanol vindo das usinas. Então, o nosso sistema ele trabalha em um sentido inverso do derivado, né, porque as nossas refinarias estão mais próximas da costa, ou seja, a produção de gasolina e diesel está mais próximo dos grandes centros consumidores, e o país ele transporta o derivado para o interior. Já o biocombustível é o inverso, ele é produzido no interior e a gente precisa transportar ele para a costa. Então, os nossos terminais estão localizados no interior para isso, fazem o transporte, e a gente atende hoje, principalmente, o mercado da Grande São Paulo, que é o maior mercado consumidor de etanol hoje no país, e a Grande Rio, além de no Rio de Janeiro, a gente tem uma saída portuária em que a gente expande o nosso negócio para operações de exportação e cabotagem. E aí eu trouxe aqui 2 cases para conversar com vocês, já sobre os efeitos que o nosso negócio está causando aí no mercado, né? Primeiro, o caso de São Paulo, e aí a gente vê, assim, que eu falei que é o maior centro consumidor de etanol, né? Hoje, né, inclusive hoje, com a Logom presente, mas o sistema está expandindo esse ano para São Paulo, a gente vai triplicar a nossa capacidade de entrega, mas hoje a realidade é que 80 mil caminhões eles entram na região metropolitana para transportar etanol, e também diesel e gasolina. Por uma condição de mercado, a gente tem um excedente de diesel e gasolina sendo entregue ali naquela região metropolitana de São Paulo. Esse produto está sendo transferido de caminhão para o interior e esse caminhão está retornando com etanol. Então, a gente tem um fluxo muito grande ali naquela região metropolitana de caminhões, o que a gente pretende mudar esse cenário. E aí aqui vem a provocação do que vai ser no futuro, inclusive quando a gente trabalha de forma sinérgica com o duto de gasolina e diesel, né? Então, o que a gente está esperando? É que a gente faça uma transformação da logística, então, a gente use o modal dutoviário, a gente use a capacidade do modal dutoviário, fazendo com que o etanol entre lá nos terminais localizados no etanol, ele desça aqui para atender a Grande São Paulo, assim como os derivados também possam utilizar ainda mais esse modal e serem e atender o mercado consumidor do interior mais próximo ainda, né? E aí você tem um deslocamento do modal rodoviário em que ele possa ficar mais eficiente em distâncias menores, né? Isso de cara, ali naquela região de São Paulo, metropolitana, quem é da região sabe dos problemas que tem ali, você já pode tirar em torno de 70 mil caminhões, viagens de caminhões por ano, né? Você vê uma redução muito boa, e junto com ela vem vários benefícios, a redução de emissões de carbono, em torno de 40 mil toneladas de carbono por ano, e todo o impacto no trânsito, em que você tem um alívio lá nas vias rodoviárias, poluição, né, poluição do escapamento, aquela fumaça preta, etc., né? Então, isso é um dos benefícios que vai vir com o advento, com o uso da capacidade do modal dutoviário. E um outro case que eu trouxe para vocês um case da exportação. A gente fez esse ano a nossa primeira operação de exportação para a Califórnia, né? Quem não conhece, a Califórnia tem um programa ambiental muito bem desenvolvido, o LCFS, que é Low Carbon Fuel Standard, que, no fundo, dá um prêmio ambiental que vira econômico ao produto brasileiro, ao etanol brasileiro, mas eles olham toda a cadeia, né? Eles olham a pegada de carbono de toda a cadeia, inclusive da logística, e essa aqui é uma opção que eu estou mostrando aqui, o nosso case é uma opção de uma pegada de carbono muito menor. Então, quando a gente realizou essa operação, foram 40 milhões de litros exportados pelo Porto de Ilha d'Água. Vocês podem reparar que os mais de 700 caminhões que foram usados para fazer esse transporte saindo da usina, eles ficaram ali, eles pararam em Ribeirão Preto, que ainda é no interior, e desde o momento em que foi descarregado o etanol em Ribeirão Preto, ele não pegou outro modal que não o dutoviário até dentro do navio. E se a gente compara com a opção que era feito antes, esse caminhão ele viaja por várias vias no estado de São Paulo, ele passa, inclusive, por dentro da região metropolitana de São Paulo, ele descarrega ali no Porto de Santos. Então, com isso daí, a gente evitou, só nessa operação, a gente evitou em torno de 2.000 toneladas de carbono, além de você oferecer um maior valor agregado ao produto brasileiro que foi exportado, ao etanol. Para finalizar, a mensagem que eu queria deixar é que hoje o nosso sistema ele deve aí, reduzir em torno de 2 milhões de toneladas de carbono até 2030. A gente pretende movimentar até 9 milhões de metros cúbicos por ano em 2030. Hoje, a empresa gira em torno de 2,5 milhões, Então, tem um crescimento aí mais de 100%, que a gente pretende que aconteça, e isso significa aí 3,6 milhões de viagens de caminhões a menos, tá? Além disso, eu listo aqui outros benefícios que vêm junto, né, que a gente fala em redução de fraudes, né? O modal de escala é um modal em que os controles são maiores, ele é auditável, você consegue controlar mais, e além das reduções aí de acidentes nas vias, né, envolvendo caminhões e possíveis fatalidades. Edmar, obrigado aí.
Thank you,
Finalizo
André.
aqui.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting, a different perspective from the two previous presentations where André has shown a very important dimension of the energy transition and pipeline, which is the decarbonization of the fuel transportation. So I think is something very, very important. So now, since we have been very disciplined, we have 15 minutes for Q&A, and we have some questions already from the audience, and I would start with a question for Michael, and then I'm going to move for the other two presenters. But Michael, we have a question here from the audience asking if hydrogen could ending up as a transition solution and ultimately being replaced by full electrification. So what's the threats that electrification or all electric brings for the hydrogen and pipelines, hydrogen pipelines? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think, if I can look through my crystal ball into the future, Professor Edmar, that, hydrogen will be used in various applications, and it's already starting to be part of batteries, battery storage, a clean fuel for industrial applications, as well as breaking into the transportation sector. I believe that there'll be a mix of electrification as well as clean fuel used in the future. So I don't think that just hydrogen would be a transition fuel or energy source, but would be more of a sustainable fuel and energy used, for a long term.
Okay, thank you. So, and then I'm going to move for a question, first question for Alex. And Alex, your presentation, you have stressed the importance of energy innovation and the challenge that all these new technological options regarding CO2 or hydrogen have to develop new business models in terms of pipeline transportation. And how do you think that regulation should play a role in this technological innovation? Is there a risk that regulations could hinder technological innovation in some options? So what is your view about the role of regulation pushing technological innovation, but also creating obstacles or testing new business models and technological options?
It's a good question, Edmar. Thank you. Well, I think, when it comes to the technical development in new technologies, won't necessarily develop together with regulations, right? That's usually the case, where they run mainly in parallel, right? So I think it's in order to try to avoid any bottlenecks or even showstoppers in the future, I think it's extremely important that we engage all the stakeholders in very early phase of the different development projects. So the importance of, pre-feasibility studies from different natures, like technical safety, are extremely important. Consultation with the major stakeholders, again, it's extremely important. We see increased societal pressure for new infrastructure development. So if we imagine that pipelines for transporting the CO2 which are captured, these are probably spread all over different regions, right? Especially if we're talking about sequestering CO2 from hard to abate factors and industries like the cement industry, for instance. So meaning that we would need to have pipelines where pipelines are not existing yet. And maybe this is close to communities and other populated centers. So I think it's extremely important that we have an ample dialogue between the developers of technology, the academia, of course, regulators, so that we can jointly develop this, so that the technology and the regulations want feedback into each other, and at the end we have kind of a convergence and avoid those showstoppers.
Okay, so I will move for a question. I will still stay with Alex, because we have a lot of questions here regarding codes and standards, and some people asking if DNV have already any code for or guideline for blending hydrogen into natural gas pipelines, and how do you see, Alex, the importance of the standardization and standards for this new type of pipelines, hydrogen or pipelines or CO2 pipelines?
Yeah, okay. When it comes to the first question, if there are guidelines for blending hydrogen into natural gas in existing pipelines. So the High Ready JIP that I mentioned addresses exactly this point. What we're doing is doing several studies to develop those guidelines for transmission and distribution operators, TSOs and DSOs, to support them preparing their networks. So we have several studies going on around different countries. We're helping the government of the UK doing that as well, to prepare the entire gas network in the UK to receive hydrogen being blended together with natural gas. And there's no one size fits all, like 10% is acceptable, 20% acceptable, 40% or even 100%, right? It depends on several factors like the design criteria of those pipelines, the age, the different equipment, right? So the materials, we have steel pipelines, we have polyethylene, the in-house infrastructure that will receive that hydrogen, compressors, injection facilities. So a lot of factors need to be considered. So it's really studies that need to be done case by case, and the guidelines, I think, will give a general direction. The other question was about standards for designing those pipelines, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's pretty much the same answer, right? The other JIPs that I mentioned, all of them aim at certain, at the same thing at the end of the day, right? Recommended practices, guidelines, or even updates to existing codes and standards, like the one I mentioned for the DNV STF 101 for submarine pipeline systems, that we are, the intention is to supplement the existing design factors and design criteria for offshore gas pipelines to include hydrogen as well. So again, they have to be developed together with the new technologies, and research and development and joint industry projects. I think it's by far the best way to do that in a structured way.
Thank you, Alex. So let us now move to André Aquino. And André, you made a very good point in this session, calling the attention for the importance of decarbonization of the transportation of the fuels. So your business is decarbonizing the transportation of ethanol.
Yes.
And I would like to know who benefits from this in terms of the appropriation of carbon credits. We know we have this carbon credit in ethanol, the RenovaBio in Brazil. Do Logum have any benefit, direct benefit from this, or is the ethanol producers that sell this the credits from using Logum pipeline?
We can ask this question to COP26 right now, which it's $1 million question. I will say my opinion, but we have different kinds of credits. So for a project like us, we need financial. We need financial to build and construct this pipe system. So I think that this credit should be with the constructor and operator of this system.
Okay, very good point. We really need to think about how the carbon credit give the right incentives in the industry. So, and up to now, transportation has been a missing point in the carbon credit designs worldwide. So your presentation show up a very important point here to think about. So we have very few minutes left, but I'll make a final question for Michael. And Michael, I would like to see your impression regarding CO2 and hydrogen transportation, which is by far the most promising new business areas for pipelines. And in your opinion, what is missing? Is technology or regulation, standardization, regarding the licensing of these new types of pipelines?
Yeah, it's a great question. We could probably spend hours answering that one. I think, Professor, really quick though, some of the impediments really are a little bit on the technology side in terms of commercial at-scale carbon capture systems that are affordable, and then also say clean hydrogen production systems that are commercially scalable and affordable. And then on the policy side, it's the incentivizing these commercial schemes. So for instance, we're talking about carbon taxes, we're talking about carbon credits. A lot of operators that would like to go into this area and start capturing and sequestration CO2 or producing hydrogen may not have all the incentives that they need in terms of, putting world-class, world-scale projects together. So I think some of that money and financial incentives has to come from the public sector beyond just private investment.
Thank you, Michael. Very good. So I think we are almost there. We have 2 minutes, and I will just take advantage of these 2 minutes to wrap up your presentation. We had a very, very good presentations on energy transition impact on the pipelines, pipeline business, and it's clear that the opportunities are much bigger than the threats. At least we saw lots of talking about opportunities and very few mentions about threats. I think that the main threat is not being enough agile. The industry not being enough agile to take advantage of these opportunities. So we have a big opportunities, and we need to take advantage of it very fast. And that's one mention that I got from your presentations. And these opportunities lies on the increasing demand for pipelines for new energy products, such as biofuel, or renewable energy products such as biofuel, biomethane. Why not? It's something that is popping up in Brazil very significantly, and in Europe also. Hydrogen, also the capture and transportation of CO2. We saw in Alex's presentation, also in Michael's presentation, that there is a huge potential, and there is a lot of movements and at this moment in terms of the new projects development for the CO2 transportation. And the dimension presented by André, which is very complementary to this, both the two previous presentation, which is the decarbonization of the transportation, not only of the transportation of biofuels or decarbonization of the transportation of this new business for the pipeline, but the old business, which is transporting diesel and gasoline. In Brazil, we do this a lot with trucks, and there is a huge potential for using pipelines to decarbonize the fossil fuels. Why not? The liquid fossil fuels. And for this, we would need incentives and the creation of a well-designed carbon credit market would be something interesting to incentivize this new model for transportation and decarbonization of the transportation of the energy in general. So that's the message that I got. I think I'm sure that given the high level of this presentation, you got much more than I mentioned here. But I would like to thank everybody for being here with us, our speakers, and also the audience for being in this session. And thank you very much for this presentation. Thank you.